Hi, and welcome back to Lisa's Stamp Studio. I have a technique for you today called the Faux Linen Technique. It's a beautiful overlay using tissue paper. And today I'm not only going to teach you how to do the overlay, but I'm going to give you lots of tips for creating backgrounds as well as coloring that faux linen. Here's a very quick look at the card we're recreating. The texture is beautiful. You'll be able to find the pictures, cutting dimensions, and the supplies I've used down in the video description below. And while you're there, make sure you click on the subscribe button and that bell icon so that you'll receive notifications when I'm live right here on YouTube, as well as when I share a new video. Let's head over to the stamp table and let's get started on today's card. As I mentioned in the introduction, this technique uses a piece of tissue paper. I pulled this out from my window sheets. It actually separates the window sheets in the packaging. There's also some tissue paper in the Forever Gold laser cut designer paper. You're going to want to cut this about a good inch wider and taller than what you're going to adhere it to. Keep in mind too, this technique works over stamped and embossed images as well. The first thing you're going to do is you're going to add your designer series paper to a piece of cardstock. This is just going to make it sturdier. I'll be using my silicone craft sheet. Adhesive, liquid glue, and hot glue will not stick to this, which means my work surface will be protected. I'm going to use this side of the designer series paper today, so I'm going to flip that over and I'm going to add adhesive to the back side. That now is going to get adhered here to the same size piece of cardstock to reinforce it. What we're going to do next is we're going to take the tissue paper and we are going to crumble it up as tight as you possibly can. And then you are very carefully going to unfold it. You don't want any rips in it. When you unfold it, I want you to leave the crinkles inside the paper. And then once you have it opened up, crinkle it again. The more wrinkle marks, the better this technique looks. And then once you're satisfied, go ahead and open it up once again. You don't want to flatten out those creases. You want the paper just big enough to cover the piece of designer series paper or cardstock that you're using. And you're going to see that this is going to fit well. Now the next step is going to be to add a liquid glue to the top of this so the tissue paper will stick. And I've tried all different types of things and this works the best for me. I have my multi-purpose liquid glue here, and you might recall that I mentioned that liquid glue, hot glue, and adhesive will not stick to this. So once that turns opaque and it dries, I'll be able to wipe that right off the silicone craft sheet. I have a wedge of sponge here that I've put on a binder clip to make it easy to use with my hands. When you're all finished with this, you can store it in an airtight container with a lid and you'll be able to reuse it. If you don't do that, it's going to get very, very hard and stiff and it won't be able to be reused. What I like to do is I like to use that sponge to dissipate that glue to thin it out, and then I'm going to dab it all over the cardstock. You want to pay close attention to the outside edges. Once that's done, I'm going to put this back in my airtight container so that I can use it in the future. Now with that crinkled tissue paper, you're going to lay it over the top, and you are just going to tap. The more creases, the better. Make sure that you get the outside edges, but don't flatten those creases or the tissue paper. Then what I like to do is I like to carefully lift it, and then I'll flip it over and just adhere around those edges by pressing it in place. Now this is going to need to sit and dry for about 3 minutes. Once it's dry, we're actually going to fold the excess to the back side. But if you have an awful lot, you might want to trim it because you don't want this to be too bulky because eventually this layer is going to get adhered to the card base. So I'm just going to kind of fold this up just to see if I have too much. And if I do, you can see here, I'm going to use my scissors and just trim a little bit of that away. So I'm going to leave about a ½ inch all the way around because I want to make sure that I'm going to be able to go over those outside edges and adhere this to the back. Now what we're going to do is we are going to wrap these edges to the back. And I do like to crease it up a little bit before I get started just to get an idea of placement. And you can use liquid glue again, but I like to use adhesive because I find that I can control it a little bit better. I'm adding my adhesive around the outside perimeter of the cardstock. Now that the adhesive is down, I'm going to make sure that the tissue paper is taut against the designer series paper, and I'm going to place it on the back side of the cardstock. When you get to the corners, you're going to want to miter those a little bit so that they don't stick out, and then you're going to press this down, very much like you would be wrapping a gift box. I'll repeat this process now all the way around. Once you're all finished, give it a really good press, get it as flat as you possibly can, and that's going to leave you this. Now, obviously, if you're using designer series paper with a white background, this is going to be sufficient as it is. But I purposely chose this because I wanted to be able to teach you how white tissue paper can easily be adapted to any color designer series paper. Make sure you protect your work surface for this next step, and we're going to lay that faux linen paper right here on that grid paper. I have my cinnamon cider ink pad here, which is one of the colors that are represented in the designer series paper. And I have a wedge of the Stampin' sponge. I'm going to ink up the sponge inside the ink pad, but I know that's a very strong color. So I'm going to tap some of that off to make sure that I can control the coverage. And what you're going to do is you're going to dab some color right over that tissue paper. You want to make sure that you're not rubbing. You don't want to flatten out the creases that we created. And then just repeat this to your liking. I don't want it to be too dark, so I'm going to make sure that I'm not too heavy-handed. Now, once it's finished, you're going to be able to see that we've got a beautiful faux linen technique to that designer series paper. If you find that your edges are too white, go ahead and take your sponge and sponge on the edges very carefully. Again, you want to make sure that you don't overstress that tissue paper to rip it. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to be creating a few leaves for the front of the card. I'm using this stamp set called Loyal Leaves, and I'm going to be using this image here as well as one of the greetings. For my first leaf, I want to create a variegated, more realistic look. So I'm going to start with the Bumblebee ink pad by inking up this image. Once this image has been inked up, I'm going to bring in a sponge dauber. Your finger goes up inside, which allows you to control the coverage. Again, you're going to want to make sure you have your scratch paper underneath you. I'm going to add some ink to the dauber, tapping off some of the excess so I can control it. And I'm going to add color right over this leaf in various areas. I'm going to remove that dauber from my finger, and then we'll go ahead and stamp this here. No two of these are going to be alike, but it's going to create a beautiful two-tone leaf for you. It's great to experiment with a variation of colors based on the designer series papers that you're using. I'm going to be creating one more leaf, and this time I'm using the Blackberry Bliss that's also coordinating with that designer series paper. I've just cleaned my stamp off camera. I'm going to go ahead and ink that up, and I'll stamp that here. I'm going to set this aside for just a moment, and while I have that ink pad out, I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to stamp the greeting for this card. This is a small piece of very vanilla scrap cardstock, and from that same stamp set, I took out the words, "You are strong, you are loyal, you are true." We'll go ahead and ink those up, and those will get stamped here. There is no die for this stamp set, so we're going to do a little bit of fussy cutting. I get a lot of questions about this, so I want to give you a few tips. Leave a little bit of the cardstock base around your image. If you cut right on top of the image, more than likely you're going to distort it because none of us cuts perfectly. I like just to follow the outside edges, and of course, this being a leaf, it's very forgiving because there's some jagged edges here. And then I'm just going to cut around the perimeter, and I'm going to do this now on both of these leaves. I'm going to bring that scratch paper in one more time because I want to stamp a very random background on another piece of very vanilla cardstock that's going to hold that faux linen pattern that we just created. I'm using that same cinnamon cider ink pad that we had used previously, and I've got my leaf image here. I love being able to use the same image on the focal point of my card for my background, but let me give you a tip about that. If the ink that you're using is very strong, such as this one, go ahead and ink up your stamp and then stamp off several layers of coverage on your scratch paper. And then when you stamp it randomly on the cardstock itself, it's going to be lighter, but it's going to create a beautiful tone-on-tone background without taking away from the same focal point for your card. I'm going to do the exact same thing now with my greeting because I want to make sure there's continuity between those vanilla layers. So I'm going to go ahead and ink up the stamp one more time, and then we'll stamp off a couple times and we'll add some coverage here. The base of my card is going to be 4 1/4 by 11, and I did decide to use the subtle embossing folder for the front of my card. You wouldn't think that this provides much emphasis, but it really did, and it's such a beautiful embossing folder, versatile for any type of card. I love to use my bone folder for that nice crisp edge. And now we're ready to put the card together. I'm going to start with the faux linen layer, and I'm going to adhere that to the very vanilla cardstock. My favorite way is to use dimensionals so that you can see the background. I'm going to flip that over, and I'm going to add a dimensional in each of the 4 corners, and I'm also going to be very careful to make sure that I add dimensionals strategically along these areas so that this panel does not sag. My favorite way to remove those paper backings is with my paper piercing tool attachment on my Take Your Pick tool. There's also a putty tip on the other end, which helps me pick up small pieces of cardstock as well as sequins. And then I'll go ahead and remove those paper backings. Once the dimensional backings are off, we're going to go ahead and we're going to center this on that cardstock panel. Now we're going to add this to the card base. You can see on the silicone craft sheet that the glue is dry, so you can go ahead and just rub that right off. Or if that bothers you, I want to give you a really crazy tip that works well. This is one of those sticky lint rollers. And you're going to be able to see that it picks up all that dry glue nice and easy, and it's going to spare your fingers. I'm going to flip this panel over, and I'm adding adhesive now to the back side. This is going to get adhered here to the front center of that card base. I'm starting with the variegated leaf, and I'm going to adhere that here to the center of that panel. I am going to use adhesive. If you prefer to use dimensionals, you absolutely can. And then we'll attach that here. For this leaf, I'm going to go ahead and use dimensionals, and I'll place those on the back side. I decided to tip this one so I have a little bit of visual interest. Just make sure you stay within the perimeter of your cardstock. Our greeting is going to be next. Now, I decided to make sure that my greeting was hanging off the edge a little bit, just for a little visual interest. But you're going to notice that there's going to be an elevation difference here, so I want to give you an important tip. Behind the word you are going to double stack the dimensionals. So I have two dimensionals here. I'm going to place one down, I'll remove that backing, and I'll place the other one right on top. That's going to compensate for the shallower area. And then I'll place individual dimensionals on either side of that to keep this well balanced. Our greeting now is going to go here, being careful that the word you is going to hang off where it's going to be shallower. You can place it here, or you can go all the way to the outside of your card base. I think I'll make this one just slightly different so that you can see a variation from my original card. It's beautiful as it is, and you can certainly stop here, but I'm going to add a couple accessories. I'm using 5 inches of 2 different ribbons. This is a beautiful embroidery ribbon, and this is a gorgeous gold trim from the Forever Greenery bundle. I'm going to go ahead and tie these together in a single loop bow. One of the reasons I love this type of bow is because it's not too feminine. So you're going to start by making a loop just like you would a regular bow. And when you bring this other end through, instead of pulling it like you would another loop, you're going to pull it all the way through, and you're going to pull tightly. And that's going to leave you a single loop. Now I can adjust the other end and retighten this to get it the size that I want. Once you're happy with it, you can come in with your scissors and just trim up your ends. I'll be using a glue dot to attach this ribbon. I like to place my glue dot right on top of that ribbon to make it easier without having to hold it. And then we'll tack that here at the bottom. One thing you can do if you like a rugged look is take your tool and then separate those metallic strands. To play up these beautiful fall colors, I decided to add the gilded gems. These already have glue dots on the back, which makes them really easy to use. I'm going to place one down here. I'll place another here near the greeting at the top, and then finally one other here. Isn't the texture on this card stunning? It's one they'll definitely be touching over and over again. Here is the card we created together today. Here's the one I created before you joined me. You'll notice that my greeting here goes all the way out to the base of the card, where this one only extends to the panel. Which one do you prefer? Leave me a comment below. If you don't already have a Stampin' Up! Demonstrator and you are interested in receiving copies of the current catalogs, you can head over to lisasstampstudio.com and click on catalogs to request one there. If you have enjoyed today's video, please give it a thumbs up here on YouTube, which is a like. It certainly helps. And I look forward to having you join me next time. Have a great day.